Hey everyone, and welcome to Real Talk Grimm Edition. I'm your host Josh, and this is the place where we dive into the dark, whimsical world of the Brothers Grimm. Whether you're a longtime fan of fairy tales or just starting to discover them, you're in the right spot. Each episode, I'll read a classic Grimm's fairy tale and then explore its deeper meanings, lessons, and how it may apply to our modern culture. From the well-known stories like Cinderella to more obscure ones that still carry a punch, we're going to get into what makes these tales so timeless and sometimes downright eerie. But this isn't just about reading stories. It's about peeling back the layers and looking at what these stories really teach us. The Grimm brothers didn't shy away from showing the darker side of life. And in many ways, those darker elements hold some of the most powerful messages. Whether it's about good versus evil, human nature, or just the consequences of choices. So whether you're here for the ride of a familiar story or to uncover something you haven't heard before, stick with me as we explore the fascinating and sometimes twisted world of Grimm's fairy tales. Today, we'll be discussing Tom Thumb, Journeyman. Tom Thumb, Journeyman. A certain tailor had a son who happened to be small and no bigger than a thumb. And on this account he was always called Tom Thumb. He had, however, some courage in him, and said to his father, "Father, I must and will go out into the world." "That's right, my son," said the old man, and took a long darning needle and made a knob of sealing wax on it at the candle. "And there is a sword for thee to take with thee on thy way." Then the little tailor wanted to have one more meal with them, and hopped into the kitchen to see what the lady mother had cooked for the last time. It was, however, just dished up, and the dish stood on the hearth. Then he said, "Mother, what is there to eat today?" "See for thyself," said the mother. So Tom Thumb jumped onto the hearth and peeped into the dish, but as he stretched his neck in too far, the steam from the food caught hold of him and carried him up the chimney. He rode about in the air on the steam for a while, until at length he sank down to the ground again. Now the little tailor was outside in the wide world, and he traveled about, and he went to a master in his craft, but the food was not good enough for him. "Mistress, if you give us no better food," said Tom Thumb, "I will go away, and early tomorrow morning I will write with chalk on the door of your house, 'Too many potatoes, too little meat. Farewell, Mr. Potato King.'" "What wouldst thou have, forsooth, grasshopper?" said the mistress, and grew angry, and seized a dishcloth, and was just going to strike him. But my little tailor crept nimbly under a thimble, peeped out from beneath it, and put his tongue out at the mistress. She took up the thimble and wanted to get hold of him, but little Tom Thumb hopped into the cloth, and while the mistress was opening it out and looking for him, he got into a crevice in the table. "Ho, ho, lady mistress," cried he, and thrust his head out, and when she began to strike him, he leapt down into the drawer. At last, however, she caught him and drove him out of the house. The little tailor journeyed on and came to a great forest, and there he fell in with a band of robbers who had a design to steal the king's treasure. When they saw the little tailor, they thought, "A little fellow like that can creep through a keyhole and serve as a picklock to us." "Hollo!" cried one of them. "Thou giant Goliath, wilt thou go into the treasure chamber with us? Thou canst slip thyself in and throw out the money." Tom Thumb reflected a while, and at length said, "Yes," and went with them to the treasure chamber. Then he looked at the doors above and below to see if there was a way any to crack them. It was not long before he espied one which was broad enough to let him in. He was, therefore, about to get in at once, but when the two sentries who stood before the door observed him and said to one another, "What an ugly spider is creeping there! I will kill it." "Let the poor creature alone," said the other. "It has done thee no harm." Then Tom Thumb got safely through the crevice into the treasure chamber, opened the window beneath which the robbers were standing, and threw out to them one thaler after another. When the little tailor was in the full swing of his work, he heard the king coming to inspect his treasure chamber, and crept hastily into a hiding place. The king noticed that several solid thalers were missing, but could not conceive who could have stolen them, for locks and bolts were in good condition, and all seemed well guarded. Then he went away again, and said to the sentries, "Be on the watch, someone is after the money." When therefore Tom Thumb recommenced his labors, they heard the money moving, and a sound of clink, clink, clink. They ran swiftly in to seize the thief, but the little tailor, who heard them coming, was still swifter, and leapt into a corner and covered himself with a thaler, so that nothing could be seen of him. And at the same time he mocked the sentries and cried, "Here am I!" The sentries ran thither, but as they got there, he had already hopped into another corner under a thaler, and was crying, "Ho, ho, here am I!" The watchman sprang there in haste, but Tom Thumb had long ago got into a third corner, and was crying, "Ho, ho, here am I!" And thus he made fools of them, and drove them so long round about the treasure chamber, that they were weary, and went away. Then by degrees he threw all the thalers out, dispatching the last with all his might, and hopped nimbly upon it, and flew down with it out the window. The robbers paid him great compliments. "Thou art a valiant hero," said they. "Wilt thou be our captain?" Tom Thumb, however, declined, and said he wanted to see the world first. They now divided the booty, but the little tailor only asked for a cruiser, because he could not carry more. Then he once more buckled on his sword, bade the robbers good-bye, and took to the road. First he went to work with some masters, but he had no liking for that, and at last he hired himself as manservant in an inn. The maids, however, could not endure him, for he saw all they did secretly, without their seeing him, and he told their master and mistress what they had taken off the plates and carried away out of the cellar for themselves. Then said they, "Wait, and we will pay thee off," and arranged with each other to play him a trick. Soon afterwards, when one of the maids was mowing in the garden, and saw Tom Thumb jumping about and creeping up and down the plants, she mowed him up quickly with the grass, tied all in a great cloth, and secretly threw it to the cows. Now amongst them there was a great black one, who swallowed him down without hurting him. Down below, however, it pleased him ill, for it was quite dark, neither was any candle burning. When the cow was being milked, he cried, "Strip, strap, stroll, will the pail soon be full?" But the noise of the milking prevented his being understood. After this, the master of the house came into the cow byre and said, "That cow shall be killed tomorrow." Then Tom Thumb was so alarmed that he cried out in a clear voice, "Let me out first, for I am shut up inside her." The master heard that quite well, but did not know from whence the voice came. "Where art thou?" he asked. "In the black one," answered Tom Thumb. But the master did not understand what that meant, and went out. Next morning the cow was killed. Happily Tom Thumb did not meet with one blow at the cutting up and chopping. He got among the sausage meat. And when the butcher came in and began his work, he cried out with all his might, "Don't chop too deep! Don't chop too deep! I am amongst it!" No one heard this because of the noise of the chopping knife. Now poor Tom Thumb was in trouble. But trouble sharpens the wits, and he sprang out so adroitly between the blows that none of them touched him, and he escaped with a whole skin. But still he could not get away. There was nothing for it but to let himself be thrust into a black pudding with the bits of bacon. His quarters there were rather confined, and besides that, he was hung up in the chimney to be smoked. And there time did hang terribly heavy on his hands. At length in winter he was taken down again, as the black pudding had to be set before a guest. When the hostess was cutting it in slices, he took care not to stretch out his head too far, lest a bit of it should be cut off. At last he saw his opportunity, cleared a passage for himself, and jumped out. The little tailor, however, would not stay any longer in a house where he fared so ill, so at once set out on his journey again. But his liberty did not last long. In the open country he met with a fox who snapped him up in a fit of absence. "Hullo, Mr. Fox," cried the little tailor. "It is I who am sticking in your throat. Set me at liberty again." "Thou art right," answered the fox. "Thou art next to nothing for me, but if thou wilt promise me the fowls in thy father's yard, I will let thee go." "With all my heart," replied Tom Thumb. "Thou shalt have all the cocks and hens that I promised thee." Then the fox let him go again, and himself carried him home. When the father once more saw his dear son, he willingly gave the fox all the fowls which he had. "For this I likewise bring thee a handsome bit of money," said Tom Thumb, and gave his father the cruiser which he earned during his travels. But why did the fox get the poor chickens to eat? "Oh, you goose, your father would surely love his child far more than the fowls in the yard." All right, now that we've heard Tom Thumb Journeyman, let's break it down. This is a story packed with adventure, trickery, and survival. But I think at its heart, it's about resilience, how wit and determination can outmatch physical limitations. Thumbling, or Tom Thumb, despite being no bigger than a thumb, refuses to be confined by his size. He's ambitious, he's daring, and honestly, he's a little mischievous. He sets out into the world not just to survive, but to experience it fully, pushing past the boundaries that others might assume would hold him back. I think what makes this story interesting is that Tom doesn't take the traditional hero's journey. He's not fighting dragons or rescuing a princess. Instead, he's dodging death at nearly every turn, outsmarting cruel masters, fooling robbers, and escaping being eaten by a cow, and even tricking a fox. His life is a constant balancing act between intelligence, trickery, and sheer luck. So some themes that stand out. First is courage and ambition. Right from the start, Tom Thumb insists on leaving home and seeing the world, despite his small stature. And that's a theme we see a lot of in fairy tales, the idea of leaving home to seek your fortune. But here it's particularly striking because Tom seems so ill-equipped for the task. He's even taken up before he was ready to go. But none of that stops him. It's a reminder that ambition, it's not about size or strength, it's about your mindset. And then there's adaptability and quick thinking. Every time Tom is faced with a life or death situation, he finds a way to escape. When his master's wife tries to punish him, he hides in a drawer. When he's caught stealing for the robbers, he plays a game of cat and mouse and leads the guards on a wild goose chase. Even when he's literally swallowed by a cow, he still finds a way to call out for help. This is a fairy tale version of the classic underdog story. Tom survives not because he's the strongest, but because he's the smartest. And it's a lesson in thinking on your feet and using what you have to your advantage. And then it also touches on the morality of trickery. Now, and I think this is where it really gets interesting, because Tom isn't exactly a noble hero. He helps the robbers steal from the king. He rats out the maids for taking extra food and ultimately tricks a fox into letting him go by promising his family's chickens. He's not necessarily bad, but he's definitely not above using deception when it suits him. And I think this makes the story a bit more complicated than just a simple good versus evil tale. It suggests that In a world where the odds are stacked against you, sometimes a little cleverness, even dishonesty, can be necessary for survival. But it also comes with risks. Every time Tom gets too comfortable in his trickery, he ends up in a new, more dangerous situation. And then there's the idea of family versus material wealth. Because the ending, it brings everything full circle. After all of his adventures, Tom finally returns home, but not without a price. His father has to give up all his chickens to the fox. It's an interesting moment because it suggests that in the end, family is worth more than all those material possessions. The father, he doesn't hesitate to trade his livestock for his son's safety, and it reinforces the idea that relationships are more valuable than wealth. But how does this story connect to our modern world? So let's start with overcoming limitations. Today, people face all kinds of challenges, whether it's economic struggles, social barriers, or physical limitations. Tom's story is a reminder that being underestimated doesn't mean being incapable. With intelligence, persistence, and creativity, it's possible that you can overcome obstacles, no matter how insurmountable, how difficult they seem. Then there's the entrepreneurial spirit. Tom never settles. He doesn't stick with his first job or second or even third. He's constantly moving. He's looking for new opportunities and refusing to be boxed into any one thing. And that's very much in line with today's modern gig economy. People are breaking away from traditional career paths and trying to forge their own way, whether through freelancing, startups, or other unconventional work. And then there's the cost of being too clever, because there's also a cautionary aspect to the story. While intelligence and trickery can get you ahead, they can also backfire. Think about how this plays out today. People who manipulate systems, whether in business, politics, or even social media, they may find short-term success, but there's always a risk of getting caught. Tom escapes every time, but not without consequences. He ends up trapped, swallowed, and nearly turned into sausage more than once. And then there's the idea of the balance between work and family. That final trade-off, giving up the chickens for Tom, that resonates with a very modern issue. The balance between work life and personal life. In today's fast-paced world, there's often pressure to prioritize career success over family time. But this story reminds us that in the end, relationships matter far more than individual wealth. So, what's the takeaway from Tom Thumb Journeyman? Well, it's a story about pushing past your limitations, being adaptable, and using intelligence to survive. But it's also a warning. Too much trickery can lead to trouble, and at some point, you have to decide what really matters. Because while Tom may be small, his journey is big and his story holds lessons for today. Whether you see him as a hero, a trickster, or just a tiny guy trying to make his way in the world, one thing is for sure. He's proof that size doesn't determine strength, and that sometimes the smallest among us have the biggest adventures. And that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk Grimm Edition. I hope you enjoyed diving into the story of Tom Thumb Journeyman and its deeper meanings as much as I did. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. We drop a new episode every Monday. And if you have thoughts on today's tale, whether you agree with me or you disagree or you just have your own take, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me on social media at Real Real Talk on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, or send me an email at therealrealtalk@gmail.com. Let me know what you think or just say hi. And if you are enjoying the show, consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps others find us and it keeps the conversation going. But until next time, thanks for listening and stay curious, question the stories around you, and keep exploring the darker side of fairy tales.